The film director Ken Russell has died at the age of 84. He was one of Britain's most acclaimed and controversial filmmakers. Known for his flamboyant style, he was best known for his adaptation of Women in Love and The Who's rock opera, Tommy.
Ken Russell's portrait of the composer Elgar, one of a series of acclaimed arts documentaries he made for the BBC in the 1960s. They were beautiful to look at, seductive to listen to, and thoroughly self-indulgent. They marked him out as a filmmaker of talent, some said genius.
Camera speed.
Okay, 339, take one.
At the BBC, he learnt his craft as a director and developed his trademark style, flamboyant and visually extravagant. He moved into cinema, where his second major feature, Women in Love, was acclaimed as a masterpiece.
We shan't save them, Father. There's no knowing where they are. And there's a current as cold as hell.
Go home and look to yourself.
Accuse me of exposing political chicanery and the evils of the state, and I would plead guilty. But what man?
But as time went on, his films became more extreme. The Devils reflected his fascination with sex and religion and was widely panned.
Things kept for a day, he would need to be reminded that he was once loved.
There was a terrible feeling of death in the air and death not mattering. And people were totally indifferent to death in a very odd sort of way.
Tommy, made in 1975, was typically overblown.
He stands like a statue, we got part of the machine. Stealing all the bumpers, always playing clean. He plays by intuition, that digit counters fall. That deaf, dumb, and blind kid sure plays a million-pound ball.
There followed more than 30 years in which his films grew progressively less successful and the difficulties he faced in financing them progressively greater.
I sent a script to Channel 4 the other day, and it was called Vampire Vigilantes, and it was really exciting, blah, 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 blah. And it eventually came back about 6 months later, signed by somebody I'd never heard of, a name totally unknown to me, saying, "Thank you for your script, it's not cinematic enough." I nearly went mad! Not cinematic enough from me! The Federico Fellini of East Boulder. That's where I live.
Action. Music.
Better to remember his successes, like the musical The Boyfriend, starring Twiggy, a reminder that Russell, however self-indulgent and undisciplined he sometimes was, could also be wonderfully entertaining.
Nick Graham with that report. Well, a little earlier, Simon McCoy spoke to the film director Michael Winner, who described Ken Russell as unique.
Well, he was a one-off, but he'd been very, very ill for a long time. And I'm afraid nobody lasts forever. That doesn't mean I don't greatly sorrow at his departure. I met Ken in the mid-60s. And in 1968, Oliver Reed said to me on a mountain in Austria, "There's a man coming called Ken Russell, and he wants me to do television." He said, "I'm not doing television." He said, "You've made me a movie star." I said, "Well, Oliver, I think you could go with Ken Russell. I think you'll find it rewarding." Because he was so innovative. He was so daring. It was really, he had a unique style and ploughed a unique furrow. And of course, Oliver did many televisions and many movies with him. He was very jovial, Ken, when you met him privately. He wasn't the sort of mad sadist, which you might think from seeing some of the movies. But he made an enormous contribution, albeit fairly brief, to English cinema.
You use the word daring. To many others, that was controversial. They would use that word. What was it about his films that did push at those boundaries?
Well, if you take a film like The Devils, I saw what was cut out of The Devils. It was almost longer than the film itself. I mean, the things he had that was going on in The Devils that the censor would not allow, and that was quite an easy age to get things through the censor, were beyond belief. He obviously had this this duplicity of mind, as it were, so he pushed the barriers completely, got away with it sometimes, and didn't get away with it others. But he made some startling movies, startling.
As a director, what makes a movie startling? What is it about a Ken Russell film that stands out?
Well, I think the composition of the scenes, the composition of each image on the screen was very good. He had a great eye for imagery. And then, of course, he had a great eye for the grotesque. There were a lot of grotesques. Even in Tommy, it was full of grotesques. The Devils was full of ultra-grotesques. And of course, he loved music, so he did a lot with musicians and composers, which other people would not do. No, he was very, very unique, and sadly gone, and has sadly been gone from the scene creatively for quite a long time, because that sort of thing is so imaginative and so strong that it wears out its welcome.
And in terms of the ego, it's something that's often said of you. I mean, he appeared in one of his films, The Russia House. He wasn't immune to appearing in front of the camera himself.
Well, I think directors occasionally do that for a gag. I don't think that means they seriously want to be an actor. But he was a good-looking type, Ken, to be in a spy thriller, really. He was like the mad professor. But and he had very unusual ways of making movies. He took all these, what we call takes, and then he never looked at them. The editor chose which one to use, and he never saw them again until the film was finished. I mean, everybody else goes and looks at the rushes and chooses the takes. He had a very strange way of working, but it was very effective, of course.
Finish this sentence. Ken Russell was special because...
He was nuts. He was nuts. We need a few nutters.
Well, that was Michael Winner speaking to Simon McCoy at Little.